Welcome everyone. I'm Mark Walker from AbilityNet. I'm your host for today. Please come on in and join us for our session about Are you ready for the European Accessibility Act? You're in the right place if you want to discover more about the EAA and how to become compliant. Got about 800 people registered today, so a good turnout. Take a little while for everybody to file in, and usually take a couple of moments to get started, and then we'll do a little bit of housekeeping. If you're used to Zoom and you can hear me, you can turn on the captions. There is a live captioner who's providing human captions, and you can then turn on the captions if you need them. There are some questions and answers. The link was troublesome logging in. Be very helpful, whoever the anonymous attendee is, because you popped up as anonymous. That might be why it was a problem for you. Please let us know what you were doing, because we do have gremlins with Zoom from time to time. If there was any issue about getting in or clicking on things or the player not working properly, please do let us know. Whether that's an accessibility issue or any other reason, it's always useful to know.
Mark, if you can just either speak up or just turn the volume up on your mic, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. I've taken the other one out. I think it wasn't working. Is that better?
Yeah, it's great. Thank you.
Great, thank you. No, that's really helpful. Thanks. I've got somebody from very warm and sunny Nottingham. We noticed that there were some signer-uppers from, we were going alphabetically, and it started with Argentina and then it went to Australia and Austria. So we have got a very international audience coming in today, we think, or maybe potentially watching. If you're in Australia, you might be watching a recording of this, of course. So welcome everybody, and it's great to have you here. Okay, we've got up to just over 300, so I'm going to get cracking on the slides, and then people will join as we go along. Got plenty to try and cover today, so if we could take the next slide, please. This is the information you may need about accessibility. So there are live captions which you can switch on. There is also additional captions that you can track online at streamtext.net/player?event=AbilityNet. There are also going to be, this is going to be recorded. You can access the slides if you need them. Please tell us. There's going to be available afterwards, but even now. Please use the question and answer. You should find that the chat is not enabled. That is a bit of a pain for accessibility for some screen readers, so we generally don't use chat in our webinars. So please use the Q&A to just log anything you've got there, even if it's just hello. Carl, you've just noticed you don't have access to the chat. That's why you don't have access to the chat. There's an accessibility issue for some screen readers where they have to listen to every single thing that goes into the chat. So we disable that and use the question and answer panel instead. I mentioned that all slides and transcripts and a recording will be made available afterwards. I would also mention that every question that comes in and all the questions that were submitted beforehand will be fed into our FAQs after this event. And I'll mention a few times that the FAQs is probably the primary resource you're going to turn to after this event. For any questions and answers that we've picked up. We'll go away and work out the best answers to those questions between us and publish that quite quickly. So do put any questions that you've got into the question and answer. If we don't get through it today, we will be sharing that FAQ afterwards. And finally, there is a feedback form. If somebody did have a particular problem logging in, for example, or if there's anything about using chat or any of those sort of basic usage problems, please let us know that. But also, obviously, the actual content of the event and anything you want to feedback or further questions you have, please use the feedback form so that we can continue to provide what's helpful to you. Great. Next slide, please. So there are three of us here. There's myself. I'm from AbilityNet. I'm the head of marketing. Via and Alex are here. Via and Alex, do you just want to briefly say hello? Make sure your technology is working for everybody. Via, hiya.
Hi there. Yes, my name is Vaya, and I'm an accessibility consultant working for AbilityNet. Nice to see you all.
Okay, thank you. And Alex?
Hello, I'm Alex Raymond. I'm one of the legal directors at Russell Cook Solicitors, and we're delighted to be working with AbilityNet on these webinars.
Fantastic, thank you. Next slide, please. This is briefly what we're going to cover. We're going to just tell you a little bit about who we are so that you understand what sort of advice we can offer and how we can help. Via is going to provide an introduction to the EAA. Alex is going to tell us a little bit more about the legal position. And then we have, because we had so many people register, we've got lots of questions. So we've picked 4 that we think are fairly representative. We're going to try and allow as much time as we can for that section where we can take questions from the Q&A in here, plus anything that comes out of anything that you hear. And then next steps, just to mention, in case you hadn't realized, this isn't the only webinar that we're running on this topic, and you won't be finished at the end of it, and you won't know everything you need to know. So please be aware that this is a stepping stone to 2 further events, and we'll come to that in a second. But it is the case that we're going to take the questions that we think relate primarily to scope and what it covers and who's involved. Subsequent sessions will look at testing and documentation. If we could see the next slide, please. Speaking of which, this is how AbilityNet is sharing resources around EAA. We ran a webinar last July. We did some work at TechShare Pro starting in 2023. So we've got various resources that we've compiled around this as it's emerged. There still is some unknowns, as you'll discover today, but there's a lot that is known. And certainly with the deadline in June, we're all thinking about how we can get ready for that. So this series is designed to help you step forward through that. First and obvious starting point is what is it and who's in scope? That's today. There is quite a lot of questions that have come in around standards and testing, how it links to the WCAG guidelines, how it links to the public sector guidelines, what we test for, what's compliant, what's conformance in, so on. And then also documentation. As you get closer to the detail, you realize that it's very important that you get your documentation sorted. So by May, you should be in a position to begin putting your documentation together and thinking about publishing that in time for the deadline. So there'll be links shared after the event to sign up for the subsequent events. They are already online now, but you can see the point is that we're trying to break that down into manageable steps for you. We have a hub about all of our information on it at abilitynet.org/EAA, and we will be publishing FAQs. There are some already on the landing page, but in the next week or so, we'll be compiling a much more comprehensive set of frequently asked questions based around some of the core themes that we can see that people are asking about. Next slide, please. If you're not familiar with AbilityNet, we're a UK charity. We've been involved in accessibility and assistive technology for more than 25 years. We say that we're at the intersection between disability, innovation, inclusion, and technology. When we started, that was a very, very, very specialized and bespoke area. These days, most of the stuff we help people with is in their phone or in their laptop or desktop machine, and it might be in their car, and it may well be something they speak to rather than touch. So we span all types of disabilities and all areas of accessibility. We're proud to have been a founder of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, which is particularly relevant today, I think, because there's a need for people to understand that accessibility is a profession, specialized discipline, lots of expertise that people require to get through the journey of accessibility. We have a large team of professionals. All of our staff are trained, including sales and marketing staff and others with IAAP qualifications. And we organize TechShare Pro, which is Europe's largest accessibility gathering. We're going into the 9th year of that this year. So lots of interest in lots of different ways with the European Accessibility Act. Next step, please. So we describe this as a journey. Everybody inside the accessibility world says we're on a journey. It's true. You need us and others, I think, to help you set a strategy and understand where you're going. That's not always the place that people start, but it becomes obvious quite quickly that you need a plan. We can do audits and we can do testing. We can offer training. We do inclusive user research and user testing. We provide accreditation and certification, and we have lots of guides and resources on our website that you can use for free. Next slide, please. For this particular piece of work, we're pleased to be working with Russell Cook. And Alex, could you just say a couple of words about what you're doing and the connection into the work that you already do with clients around the EAA?
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, so Russell Cook Solicitors, we're a full service law firm, but we provide advice and support around implementation of new laws and how they impact on our clients. And that's why in relation to the EAA, we can provide advice around the sort of technical scope of whether you're in scope of it, what it means, and compliance with it. And that's where we were sort of working with AbilityNet to hand back over to the practical steps then for implementation, if that helps. Perfect,
thank you. And I'll mention a link. We've just set up the last couple of days a link to a new service that we've launched with Russell Cook called the EAA Readiness service, which is bringing together questions around legal and questions around accessibility and planning and structure and strategy. So that will be mentioned as we go along as something that you may be interested in, and gives you access to either legal or technical or strategic advice, depending on where you're at. Okay, next slide, please. We are going to ask you a question. Just before I dive into this, the questions just popped up, but we also asked this question in a poll, in a survey. So it will be interesting to see how far apart you are from the survey that we conducted in January. You can see that the questions are range from, we are clear about what we need to do and confident that we will be compliant. We're all clear about what we need to do. We're clear about what we need to do, but not sure we're going to get it done by June. We've got some idea about what we need to do, but not sure we'll get it done by June. We're not prepared and I don't know what I need to do. And I'm really not sure about any of it. It's interesting tracking this sentiment over time. And when we talk about some similarities with other acts, and particularly things like GDPR, for example, I think it's interesting to see where people are at in their own sense of their understanding within their organization. We have about 2/3 of you have voted so far. I'm just waiting for that to tick up on. If you haven't found the poll yet, it should be in a pop-up, which is accessible, and you should be able to vote within the poll. Do let us know where you think you're at. It's just a really interesting way of us understanding who's in the room and what expertise and questions you may have as well. Okay, let's publish that result, please. If we could end and share the results, I think you'll find it interesting. So I'm looking at the top line is 10%, 9% of people, 25 people on this call have said we are clear about what we need to do and confident that we will be compliant. That chimes with the survey that we did before. The smallest number will be the one that says that top answer, which is that you're ready to go. You may be here just to check some details. You may be thinking about what you're going to do next. Maybe you're just confirming what you think you know about certain parts of it. But you're in a small minority. 81% people are not clear about what they're doing and are not confident about hitting the deadline. So a decent number, another 12% say that you've got a good idea what you need to do, but you don't know if you're going to get it done by June, which obviously means you have some plan and some knowledge of EAA requirements. The biggest number, not apart from, well, there's I'm not sure, which I guess could be any one of the ones above, because you may be slightly uncertain where you are. But some people, most people are saying they have some idea about it, but not sure they'll be ready by June. And then 17% are saying that we're not prepared and we don't know what we need to do. So we're going to assume that there's some basic knowledge needed, but there's also a reasonable amount of knowledge in here about what you might need to do. So I guess we're all starting to firm up our knowledge and think about the next few months worth of work. That's great, thank you. If we can move on to the next slide. So Vaya, you must be, you're a lead on EAA. You must have to explain this to people all the time. What do you say? You got 5 or 6 minutes to explain to us what it is and where it comes from. What do you normally sort of cover to set the scene for people?
Okay, so yeah, let's start with a very basic. What are we talking about today? We are talking about the directive, open bracket EU close bracket 2019/882 of the European Parliament and of the Council of 17 April 2019 on the accessibility requirements for products and services. And yeah, that is quite long, and we understand now why it has been shortened to European Accessibility Act. And even this is not short enough when I only have 5 minutes to describe what it is. So yes, shortened to EAA. So it is a directive, which means that it is a legislative act that sets out a goal that EU countries must achieve. It is up to the individual countries to devise their own laws on how to reach this goal. And the process is known as transposition into national law. And this directive sets functional requirements, but it doesn't prescribe detailed technical solutions. What is the main purpose of the EAA? So the EU and most of the member states have ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And as such, they had the commitment to create a legislative framework for accessibility in line with Article 9 of the Convention. And the stated purpose of this directive in the actual text of the directive is to contribute to the proper functioning of the internal market by approximating laws, regulations, and administrative provisions of the member states as regards accessibility requirements for certain products and services by, in particular, eliminating and preventing barriers to the free movement of certain accessible products and services arising from divergent accessibility requirements in the member states. So in plain English, we would say that this directive really aims to set minimum common accessibility requirements for certain products and services so that the EU's internal market can operate smoothly. So we hear often that the EAA seeks to harmonize national accessibility legislation. It is really all about trying to create a common set of requirements across EU member states, making it easier for product and service providers to understand what they need to do to meet the accessibility requirements across Europe. And this can be achieved by eliminating and preventing any free movement barriers that may exist because of these existing different national accessibility legislations. And also the directive promotes full and effective equal participation by improving access to mainstream products and services that through their initial design or subsequent adaptation address the particular needs of persons with disabilities. So again, our interpretation in plain English is that the directive aims to bring benefits to businesses, people with disabilities, and the elderly. And it also makes it easier for customers to know what to expect when they are accessing services or they are purchasing products. So moving to the benefits for businesses and disabled people, let's start with the benefits for businesses. By removing a fragmented landscape of national regulations, businesses will be able to streamline their operations and reduce compliance costs. And as all products and services that comply with the accessibility requirements, they will be able to circulate freely in the internal market. And businesses that invest in accessible products and services, they will gain a competitive advantage. We know that 1 in 4 people aged over 16 in the European Union as of 2022 have a disability. As consumers with disabilities seek accessible options, companies that meet these requirements will increase their customer base. And also we know that prioritizing accessibility can strengthen a brand and build customer loyalty. The benefits for persons with the benefits for disabled people are that as the EAA will ensure a wider range of accessible products and services in the market, this will mean that individuals with disabilities and the elderly will find it easier to use everyday items and access essential services. As the market for accessible products and services expands, competition will likely drive down prices, making them more affordable. And as the EAA aims to lower obstacles in key areas such as transport, education, and employment, this will allow disabled people to access professional but also leisure opportunities more easily. And of course, the demand for accessibility will actually bring more expertise, and it will create new job opportunities. So very quickly, what does the EAA cover? The Act focuses on products and services, as well as websites and mobile applications deemed most important to people with disabilities. And it sets specific requirements for manufacturers, importers, distributors, and service providers. So to give you a few examples, for products, we have consumer general purpose computer hardware systems like computers, tablets, laptops, and also operating systems like Windows or Mac OS, payment terminals, for example, in shops or in restaurants, and certain self-service terminals such as ATMs, smartphones, and other equipment for accessing telecommunication services. In other words, smartphones and perhaps tablets that are capable of calling, TV equipment such as smart TVs, e-readers, for example, Amazon Kindle. And when it comes to services, we have services for telephony services, services to access audio-visual media services, for example, websites or apps of TV channels like BBC iPlayer, or on-demand platforms like Netflix, certain elements of air, bus, rail, and water transport services, consumer banking, for example, for withdrawing money, for making transfers, for online banking, for opening a bank account, e-books and e-commerce, meaning websites or mobile applications through which companies sell their products or services online, and also the answer to emergency calls to the single European number 112. Very quickly, the legislation does not apply to pre-recorded time-based media, such as videos and slides or office file formats, which were published before the 28th of June 2025. It doesn't apply to online maps if essential information is provided in an accessible digital way. It doesn't apply to websites and other forms of archiving content which does not get updated or edited after the 28th of June 2025, and it doesn't apply to micro enterprises providing services. When does it come into force? All businesses whose products or services are in scope should consider the impact of the EAA upon their business and develop and implement a plan for achieving compliance by 28th of June 2025. There is the Article 32 that states some transitional measures, and very quickly here I will just mention our interpretation. We see it as a period of change and giving people time to adjust to new laws, and we understand that it only applies to existing staff, and any updates or any new purchases will need to be accessible straight away. We have the 28th of June 2030, during which service providers may continue to provide services using products which were lawfully used by them to provide similar services before that date, and also have the date of the 28th of June 2045, when self-service terminals can operate until the end of their economically useful life, which is the maximum 20 years. And that's why we've got the 2045 date. So this is the basics that I wanted to cover, and I'll pass the control back to you, Mark.
Thank you. So if you've never heard that explained to you before, there's still going to be lots of questions. You saw how people were feeling in terms of being prepared. The scoping questions really, it's worth saying this is a hugely ambitious act. From the point of view of the closer you get to it, the more you see how many different things people are trying to make accessible. So if you're used to accessibility as a concept and a social purpose, it's trying to cover as much ground as it can. And that might be why, if you're new to it, you may be looking for simple answers in there. And actually what you find is that there's quite a lot of complexity about which particular products and services, and also those timelines, because there will be some things that are expected to be made accessible fairly easily, and other things that may be more difficult to make more accessible via mentioned self-service terminals. They have a useful life which extends beyond June 2025, so it isn't like that all the ticket machines in the railway stations are going to disappear. So setting the context for that, if we could pull up the next slide, there is actually a copy of the directive. It's full of jargon, it's full of detail, for all the reasons that you've just heard about why it's ambitious, but the answers are in there somewhere. And actually in there, for example, is a list of all the things that are in scope, and they're quite specific, and they're quite particular to particular devices or activities. Somebody's asked a question here about, will the directive apply to all websites, even if such websites do not sell products or services directly? That's the type of question where you may need to check where you sit within the supply chain. Our understanding is that the consumers will be able to access and buy services from a website. If they're in the EU, then you're in scope. And as an example, AbilityNet, we think, is in scope because people can book our training courses online. And that's a service that people use and book their own courses as individuals. And so therefore we're in scope because that's consumers booking a training course. We happen to be running that from the UK, of course, but we have no restriction on where people join us from anywhere in the world. So that's the sort of detail that you need to look at a little bit more closely and see where you're in, whether you're in scope or not. And do, if you have chance, just have a quick look at the EAA directive. There's lots in there, but it is a helpful place to just feel a bit more comfortable and to navigate a little bit. So let's move on to the legal position. Alex, you've been hearing there about sort of the purpose of the Act. The first question that's popped up almost is, so I'm in the UK, what's it got to do with me? I guess there's also questions about whether existing regulations connect to it that you must be considering with clients. A little bit about the exemptions, and then something about how it's going to be enforced would be really helpful to, again, just to set that initial context.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Mark. Well, I'm not going to go through the detail line by line of the directive, as Mark has just pointed out. It is very detailed. It has an awful lot of definitions in it. And so what I'm just going to pick out are some of the key bits from that. So importantly, and I've seen it as one of the questions that's already popped up, as Via has said, it is law. So the directive, the EAA, it is law, and it is law within the 27 member states of the EU. And that is what that deadline of the 28th of June 2025 is. That's when it's all coming into force and you're meant to be compliant by. The issue is that for UK businesses, if the products and services that you provide are available, as Mark said, to EU customers, then there's a chance that you might be within scope. So in terms of what's in the directive, what's in the EAA, it talks about economic operators. And as Vaya has already mentioned, this includes manufacturers, authorized representatives, importers, distributors, and service providers. And looking at the audience that we've got today and who signed up, we're going to focus a little bit more on service providers. The EAA itself defines those as anyone who is providing a service on the European market or who makes offers to provide such services to any consumers who are within the EU. So as you see, that dictates that it's not just where you are based as a business, it's actually where your potential customers are, whether it's for goods or for services. And if they're in the EU, then you're potentially within scope of the EAA. And so, as I say, that's how you might be as a UK business captured and within scope. What the EAA does, and as Vaya's already said, is it's harmonising the position to try and create this level playing field, not only for the consumers, but also for businesses operating in these markets. You're not going to be starting from scratch because obviously within the UK, we have existing legislation, including things like the Equality Act that you already have ongoing obligations to. But what the EAA does is provide some very additional technical and specific requirements that have to be met. And these are the sorts of things that AbilityNet can help you work out in terms of how to implement them. As I say, I'm not going to go through all the definitions in the Act, but that's what we're here to help with in due course, if that would help. But I'll just flag that there are some exemptions. And as Vaya's already mentioned, there's an exemption for what's defined as micro enterprises. So if you're providing a service and you are able to fall within the definition of a micro enterprise, then you are able to be excluded from the requirements of this Act. And the micro enterprises, there's clear parameters around the size of your business, your turnover, your personnel. So that's another thing that we can help check with you as to whether you would or wouldn't fall within scope or whether you might be able to apply this exemption. Similarly, there are exemptions for compliance if what you would be asked to do as a requirement under the EAA would actually result in a fundamental alteration to your existing product or your existing service and the nature of that service. Again, you might be able to argue that it was so fundamental that you wouldn't be able to comply without completely changing those things. Similarly, there is another exemption that you would be arguing that there is an imposition of a disproportionate burden on you. In other words, you are able to demonstrate that what you would have to do within your business to make changes, to make yourself compliant, would actually be disproportionate to the scale of your business and what you do. So those are sort of some of the exemptions that might apply, and they're quite technical. And one thing that this also highlights and flags, and is also going to be something that's going to be picked up in the third seminar, I believe, that Mark mentioned, is that a lot of this is going to require documentation of reasons and decisions and justification as to why perhaps you say you don't fall within scope. Because these are the sorts of things that the monitoring authorities can come knocking and asking for, and you would have to demonstrate that you've considered them and why you've reached a conclusion that you either think you're a micro enterprise or some of those other exemptions apply. So that's just to hopefully give you an idea that there are some ways in which that it doesn't apply to everybody. What are the risks, obviously, with EAA? That's one of the key questions that people on this webinar and the questions that have been coming in are, it's like, what do I have to do and what's the risk if I don't do anything at all? The EAA has some strong enforcement provisions which dictate how each of the individual member states are going to effectively police the requirements. So it is at a member state level, and each member state will have the monitoring authorities who will be looking at this and keeping an eye on compliance, and the core elements of which will be applicable across all member states. But one of the nuances of the EAA is that it can be implemented in each member state in a slightly different way, and therefore some countries may have more onerous requirements than others, and that's another thing to be mindful of depending on the market that you're potentially selling to. So as I say, it's at a member state level obligation, and what each member state will have to have in place are effective means for consumers to bring complaints if they think that there's products or services that aren't meeting the requirements, and also a complaint mechanism for interested bodies, charities, legitimate sort of bodies representing individuals who are affected and have accessibility needs. There will be a network of market surveillance authorities, as they're called, who will also be able to communicate with each other and share information across all 27 member states. So that's another thing to bear in mind as to how broad the scope is of the EAA and how it's going to operate. In terms of some of the enforcement actions that are available, it works on a scaling up basis. So essentially, if there's some form of complaint and a non-compliance identified, then the business that's been approached about this will be expected to make what are corrective actions. In other words, take steps to either fix something with the product or to change their services in some way to remedy it. You'll be given a specific time period in which to make those changes, and any failure to do so for non-legitimate reasons. So basically any failure to comply with what you've been asked to correct can lead to some fairly strong sanctions in terms of either prohibition, restriction on use, or even withdrawal from the market entirely. There is also the ability to impose financial penalties, and it will be a watch this space as to what scale of penalties are likely to be imposed and for what type of infractions. As I said, all member states are connected on this, and so there would be a domino or cascade effect. So if, for example, you were picked up a non-compliant in France, there would be a sanction was imposed on you, that would be cascaded out across all 27 member states so that it would be applicable throughout the entire market and not just country specific. So again, sort of emphasizing the scale of the compliance requirements that this has. So hopefully that's a bit of a whistle stop of some of those issues for you, Mark.
It is, and I think it's worth mentioning that to people on the call that this isn't simple, but and some of these requirements are going to take some time to come through in those 27 member states. We have seen you can track progress across the 27 countries. We spoke to one of the sort of people involved in Ireland, and it's worth mentioning two things. The first thing is that he's leading some of the monitoring work in Ireland, and they're preparing for what they're going to do in Ireland. We're hoping to get him on a webinar soon to explain their approach, but they're very much intending to try and encourage and promote best practice rather than going around attempting to impose fines. Or actually in Ireland, there is mention of prison terms in their regulations. So he said, we don't want to be the authority that goes around putting everybody in prison. We want to go around making the world more accessible and helping people solve the problems that they found when they're trying to be compliant. So, and I think that's probably true across most of the monitoring authorities. They're there to make sure that best practice is followed rather than to dish out fines and cause problems for people. The other thing that's worth mentioning about Ireland is that an awful lot of what they're going to do is going to be in scope for the UK because of the nature of the businesses that people who describe themselves as working in the UK probably consider Northern Ireland to be part of their marketplace. It isn't particularly grey when you get closer to it. That will be in scope for the Irish regulators as far as they're concerned. That's, there'll be some custom and practice need to be set up. But when people are asking about whether they're covered by it within the UK, if you think about your footprint in Northern Ireland, then you're probably going to start bumping into the Irish monitoring authorities, if nothing else. So there is some complexity there, but I think the simple level that we're looking at is there is a set of guidelines and standards that you need to adhere to. There are going to be authorities in different countries. If you're used to what happens in other places, in particular in the US, people are taking individual class actions against people under the Americans with Disabilities Act. That's been a growing way that people have brought complaints to the front door of all sorts of businesses. And Alex mentioned organisations that are likely to be taking up this on behalf of particular interest groups, particular disabilities, regional, local, whatever. The first step that's suggested at the moment that I've been picking up is that will set some sort of precedent for, you know, if somebody in Italy picks that up and there's a complaint made, then that will begin to set some of those customer practice and establish precedents across the other monitoring authorities, and regulations will then be played out and harmonized and brought up to sort of a common level as we go along. So that's really helpful, thank you. I can see a few questions that are popping up. The more detailed ones are not going to be things we're going to pick up on today, but if we can go on to the questions that we have prepared, you'll see the sorts of things that we're doing. As I mentioned, we are going to do FAQs afterwards. Somebody's asked something that might relate to VAT, which we're not going to talk about today, but we can have a look at that afterwards, for example. So if we go on to the next slide, please. I've got 4 questions here, which I think that they're beginning to get a bit closer to what the questions that we had that were submitted. Please do keep dropping them into the Q&A if there are things that you can see that you want to know about today, and obviously bear in mind that we're going to be doing sort of more detailed answers afterwards if we can. So what is the difference between conformance and compliance? It's like a highly technical legal question, possibly, but it's also a way of explaining, I think, what the expectation is, that there's a standard that we're going to conform to, and that will enable us to comply with the law. I don't know. I think, Alex, is this one of yours? I think that we were talking about. You obviously deal with these sorts of words every day. Can you explain the lawyer's view of this?
Yeah, well, I think, Mark, it's probably helpful to sort of pick up the analogy that you mentioned earlier, which was the implementation of GDPR, which came in 2018. And at the time, lots of people had sort of confusion around it. And we see similarities with that in terms of the new law coming in and how it's implemented, and then how you comply with it and how you demonstrate compliance. So I think everyone's sort of far enough along on their GDPR journey that they hopefully will understand what I mean when I sort of say there are similarities. So we've had this question about what's conformance and what's compliance. So to try and break that down, we talk about conformance first. That's essentially what the EAA is saying, the legal framework that it's putting in place around accessibility requirements. And that's what is there. That is what the law says. And that's, as Mark and Vaya have also said, you know, this is about getting enhanced and greater accessibility for products and services for all of the individuals who are using them within the EU. Compliance then is about how you actually technically meet those requirements, how you demonstrate that you are meeting your obligations within the EAA. And so, as I say, there are similarities with GDPR in that you have the rules and requirements on GDPR that are in the laws, and then you also then have what happens in practice and how you say you're complying with those rights. And it's similar here. The EAA is giving overall requirements that are needing to be met, and there's detail and technical information around that. And then how you structure your compliance and how you evidence your compliance and the processes with it are what we're looking at here. So it's all about kind of accessibility by design, and so that it becomes the norm within everything that you're doing. I hope that answers.
I think the GDPR is an interesting, we're all grasping to try and understand what this all means, but the GDPR thing, I think we all, when you mentioned it to me, I was thinking, yeah, that makes sense, because we wouldn't have necessarily done any of the things that were required within the specifics of the standards that it expected. But also we wouldn't have told you that we were doing it, and we would have made no attempt to log exactly what we were doing. I guess those are the two sides of the coin. You know, we have to be able, you have to be able to make a complaint to us about privacy if you think that we are in breach of those regulations. And we need to evidence that we aren't, you know, our view of that is that we're not, and this is why. And so we need to keep records and all sorts of stuff about what we've done. Somebody's asking about documentation. Part of the documentation will be able to, some sort of audit trail to show what you did and how you arrived at whatever you've got. as well as the statement you've put on your website saying, we won't give your information to anybody else, you need to be able to prove that that's the case somehow if people are going to come knocking on the door. And then obviously the regulations have standards that require you to do certain things and hold information in particular ways. The same with the EAA. So, and in terms of how that differs across Europe, does GDPR differ across Europe? Is it another good analogy?
Yes, a very similar analogy. So the EAA, as Vaya said, is a harmonized set of requirements. So there were lots and lots of different bits of law and some gaps in law across the member states in the EU. And so what the EAA does is bring that all together sort of as one set of fundamental laws and requirements that will be applicable across each of those member states. So that's where you get that uniform approach, that nice harmonized bit. There will be slight differences in terms of how that is implemented in individual countries and how they will take that forward in terms of their exact processes around monitoring and things. But it is about having equality and equity across all of that single market. And that's the same with GDPR. The core fundamentals are the same, but it's then how you implement it and how you go about sort of enforcing it and ensuring compliance that can be slightly different.
Great, thank you. This is another thing, just mentioning Sam has just asked about consumers. I will just say our understanding is that it's primarily focused on consumers. That's what you read. There may be elements of the business to business, B2B, that does have some impact on that. That's a question of detail in terms of the scope of what you're doing. You may be in the supply chain, and therefore your customer is telling you that you need to make your stuff accessible because they're passing it on to a consumer. That's probably where we see those two things crossing over. So let's talk a little bit about higher education in particular and the public sector regulations, because when we're talking about harmonizing, the UK already has public sector regulations that relate to accessibility. Vaya, what's your view on how the two will come together? Where does EAA and the public sector regulations connect? And in particular, we did have a lot of questions from universities about higher education, which I guess is a particular use case within the public sector.
Yeah, so we are talking about two European accessibility directives here, really. The Web Accessibility Directive, from which the PSBAR, the public sector body accessibility requirements, was created specifically in the UK. And then we've got the European Accessibility Act. Both of these directives aim to improve accessibility across the EU, but they apply to different sectors and have distinct compliance requirements. The PSBAR, which is based on the Web Accessibility Directive, applies specifically to public sector bodies, and that includes higher education institutions. The European Accessibility Act goes beyond the public sector, introduces an expanded set of requirements which apply equally to economic operators from the public and from the private sectors within the EU, and to any service provider or manufacturer outside the EU that sells products and services within the EU. So when we look at the higher education, the European Accessibility Act does not, in our understanding, at least how we understand it at AbilityNet, does not explicitly regulate education or educational institutions in general. However, we would say that if an educational service offers digital products or services that fall into the categories that we've mentioned that are in scope, some examples here could be ebooks, digital learning platforms, websites, mobile apps, then we can see the benefits of considering the accessibility requirements of the EAA. We can also add here that it really makes sense from a business point of view to offer accessible products and services, because if we take the example of a European, a student based in the EU looking to enroll on an online course provided by a UK university, then the university that provides accessible online course probably will actually get the business. And of course, we shouldn't forget that it is also ethically the right thing to do, to provide accessible products and services. So that's how the EAA kind of comes as an additional layer on top of the PS bar. And I hope I have explained how it may apply to higher education institutions based in the UK for students who come from the EU.
Yeah, I think it's a good example of some of the subtleties about thinking about who the Act is for as the European consumer, and if you're interacting with those consumers digitally, then there's a good chance it's in scope. If you already have regulations like the PS bar and you're already familiar with those, there may or may not be a direct map across to most of it. We'll come on to WCAG because that's probably the obvious connector, but the documentation is possibly different. So, you know, that's the sort of level of subtlety. It may be that your actual platform and your services are not going to change hugely, but you may need to document it in a slightly different way. Those are some of the elements that we can see being played out. We work with a lot of universities, so we are talking to them about this, and we may need to peel off and look at that quite specifically, because it's going to become clearer as people start working. So if you're in a university and you're not sure, then you're probably in the same boat as most people, and getting a bit closer on the detail and seeing where you might be in scope will be helpful. So I'm going to take a final question here. We've got to try and get this done in about 4 or 5 minutes. I don't know how easy that's going to be. Most of us will have heard of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, and that's been established as the basic standard that people are required to hit. And then there's this new EN 301549, which is the standard that documents for any of those number of services and products you've mentioned. It will try to document in there the details that says this is what is accessible. What's your understanding at the moment, Via, about how the two things connect in terms of whether or not being compliant for WCAG 2.1, for example, means I'm probably going to be okay for EN 301549 and therefore conform and can therefore comply?
Okay, so let's say, first of all, what it actually is. So the EN 301549 is the European Accessibility Standard for Information and Communication Technology products and services. It was developed to establish accessibility requirements for digital technologies in the EU, with an aim to ensure that they were actually usable by disabled people. As we mentioned, it applies to various information and communication technologies like hardware, web, non-web documents, software, support services, and others. The EN 301549 incorporates the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as the standard for web and digital content accessibility. The latest version of the EN 301549 aligns with WCAG 2.1 level AA. It goes beyond WCAG by including requirements for non-web ICT. And we can say that if you comply with WCAG 2.1 level AA, then you meet most of the web-based requirements of the EN 301549. If you comply with the current version of EN 301549, then you can receive a presumption of conformity with the Web Accessibility Directive. So for the what we have in the UK is the PS bar, and that has now been updated to actually require WCAG 2.2 level AA. In the future, near future, hopefully, once that the current reviewing of the EN 301549 is completed and the standard is referenced in the official journal of the EU, the same presumption of conformity will apply to the European Accessibility Act. But as you said, Mark, we don't have enormous amount of time left today, and we have prepared our standards and testing session on the 30th of April. So yeah, that would be the webinar to learn more about this.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions I'm just going to pick up in here. It's worth mentioning, picking out from what Vaya said, that if you're here because you think that you're going to be working primarily on your website or an app, then I mean, WCAG doesn't apply comfortably with apps quite the same way anyway, so there's already a little bit of a grey area there, but that's the bit that we think is the most directly related to what's in the broader standards, which may include products and services. I'll take an example here. Somebody's mentioned the gaming industry. We had Sony at TechShare Pro. They're having to make their game machines, the hardware, accessible. They're having to look at their other devices, their cameras, their TVs, all the stuff that Sony makes. That's included within the EN 301549. There's a standard there for what an accessible games player will be and how it will be judged and how it will be tested. The games will be separate. An element within that will be relating to the interaction with the game. And then if they've got a shop and they're selling it to you, then obviously that's another element that will be covered in there. The consumer can access it. So for those of us who come at this usually with a web or an app, sort of a starting point, we think the WCAG is going to be the primary thing that you're going to be looking at. It isn't 100% clear, but it seems likely that's the direction of travel. The people who are working on the standards are the people that we know through our networks. So, you know, there's lots of connections to that. Whether it will be higher or lower than something you're already working to, it's worth mentioning as well that we're talking principally about Europe, but we've had people from Microsoft on panels at TechShare Pro saying, you know, they've got to see this in a global context. They're not going to build a different device for Europe or have a different standard that they apply in Asia, for example. So they're looking for where the floor is, you know, as a minimum, and then what they can build on top is their decision about the functionality. So this isn't just a European only thing, and it's not a UK only thing. It's about a global marketplace as well, and that adds some complexity for some people who might be on the call. As you say, this is why standards needs its own conversation, because there's plenty in there to unpack to really make sense of what may be relevant to you in terms of your own setting. Could we have the next slide, please? So this isn't just an advert, but it is an advert because we've realized that people are going to have these sorts of questions that are coming in here. And so some of them are legal, some of them are technical, some of them to do with the standard. If you think you need some help, please go and have a look at our readiness service. By June, really one of the things that's come into view, and that's why we mentioned documentation, is that to be compliant, you must say something. There's there's stuff in the Act about what the details are about what makes an accessible games player that may be different to what makes an accessible website. But by June, on the 20th of June, to comply with the regulations, you must be publishing some documentation. So you must be saying something at that point, and there's a certain format to that document that's required as well. So there's certain things that are easier to explain when we know more about where you're at and what you're doing. And that is what we're trying to do in the webinar, but you'll also understand now why there are certain things you need to ask in more detail. You can see some of the questions coming in about that. If we could go on to the next slide. It also explains why we've broken this into pieces. So with 1 minute to go, you can see that we're going to have further sessions. The documentation one, I think, will apply to everybody. Standards and testing will help you piece where you fit and what it already does. I think the thing to go away now is to go away, have a look at the regulations, have a look at the guides and stuff that are being published. Look at our hub, which is at abilitynet.org.uk/EAA. Maybe start thinking about inviting other people to further sessions as well. Legal, QA, UX, developers, designers, CTOs. There are plenty of those people in the mix who registered. We saw the job titles. It isn't just an accessibility question. There will be a need to draw people into those questions about how you're going to monitor and test for particular standards, and the documentation itself will need some legal view as well. So final wrapping up, we do need to finish now. So please do have a look at our resources online. Please do sign up to our newsletter and do sign up to future webinars. We'll be publishing the FAQs. We'll be publishing a guide in the next week or so to try and capture some of this stuff. And you can always speak to us about paid for services if that's what you really need. Alex, huge thank you for setting the legal context. Via, thank you for making sense of all that jargon and letters and numbers and things that people are beginning to try and take account of. Thank you everybody who turned up and attended. We have the session will be recorded. We will be sharing that around with you. There are also copies of the slides that we'll be sending out. And there is a questionnaire afterwards, and I can't emphasize enough, if you've still got questions, we really want to know what those are. And we want to know how we can help in subsequent sessions. So please do keep telling us what it is that we can help you with. Keep adding questions now. We'll answer those in the FAQs, and otherwise we'll see you on the 30th of April for your questions about the standards and the testing and how you know whether your product is compliant. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.